I think a great deal of his openness had to do with the fact that he knew he was dying, and he knew that he was just fed up with the government's behavior. So he was more than willing, knowing that I had understood at least a little bit of what was going on, he was much more willing to open up to me.
On November 20th, 1969, the Apollo 12 astronauts did an experiment with some strange results. They crashed the lunar module ascent stage into the surface of the moon. Shockwaves reverberated throughout the moon for over an hour. Some have likened this to ringing like a bell. These results were repeated during the Apollo 13 mission. However, this time the shockwaves lasted for over 3 hours. Hollow moon researchers say that this is proof that the interior of the moon was hollowed out by artificial means. MIT's Dr. Sean C. Solomon wrote, "The lunar orbiter experiments vastly improved our knowledge of the moon's gravitational field, indicating the frightening possibility that the moon might be hollow." On March 7, 1971, instruments placed on the moon by the Apollo astronauts recorded a cloud of water vapor passing over the surface. The event lasted for over 14 hours and covered an area of at least 100 square miles. The Earth is thought to be around 4.6 billion years old, while rocks from the moon were found to be around 5.3 billion years old. And the dust the rocks were found in is thought to be about 1 billion years older than that. This information conflicts with the theory that the moon was produced by a collision the Earth had with another body earlier in its history.
One of the things that you've got to keep in mind as well when you're looking at NASA imagery is that although the sky may appear black in those frames, in many instances, when you enhance that image, you discover that there's actually an incredible amount of image detail that's just buried in the darkness of that image. But when you amplify that scene and you begin to see what's hidden there in the sky, you can begin to make out shapes. There's a few images that show structuring. And this is all done in an effort to both hide the truth, but as well to leave a bit of the truth there for you. And again, a lot of people don't want to believe they do that, but they do. That's all part of the dripping faucet technique, where they give you tiny little bits of the truth, and you can begin to fill it in, put it together for yourself. One of the frames that really demonstrates the way they use this dripping faucet technique is a frame known as 20680 from the Apollo 17 mission. For 30 years, this frame was officially listed in their catalogs in the Apollo 17 Photographic Index as being a blank, no image data frame, a frame that has got nothing on it. While this image is most definitely sunstruck and overexposed, blank it most certainly is not.
Harrison Schmitt, created some patches for his own mission, Apollo 17, which is again the mission that we take these images from, and that we've seen a lot of this color effect. And what he put on it was Stonehenge and the sun. And the sun is a symbol of ancient Egyptian god Horus. There's all sorts of Egyptian mythology that runs through all the Apollo program, which is supposed to be Greek, but it ends up that there's really sort of a dual meaning to all this stuff, and it's an Egyptian. And what he's clearly saying to people is, look, these are ruins. They're a structure. This is what we're really doing on the moon. And I think what they're doing is they're trying in a subtle way to let people know, either because they remember it subconsciously or because they are deliberately trying to send us messages under the radar that they did not go there and pick up a bunch of rocks, but instead what they brought back, or what they were sent to investigate, was ancient extraterrestrial ruins.
One of the most important things to keep in mind whenever you're looking at any NASA imagery, whether it's Apollo imagery or imagery of Mars, it doesn't really matter. Perspective is everything. We human beings down here on terra firma are afforded one perspective of the moon. We look at it, and that's what we have to look at. We don't know what the moon looks like from the side or from different oblique angles. all we have is this singular representation that we have to look at. And NASA has in fact gone to great lengths to ensure that the imagery that they show us of the moon's surface resembles very closely, both in photometric function as well as in angling, and the dimensional properties of the image make it appear as if it would look just like it does from Earth. One of the primary obfuscation techniques that NASA uses is to simply rotate the imagery. They insert a false horizon in their oblique imagery, so by turning these images upside down, it alters vertical objects. Suddenly don't cast shadows anymore. The shadows aren't in the right places. And this technique has been used since the dawn of the space age, since the lunar orbiter missions, since even before that with Ranger missions, to make things appear as we humans expect them to appear, because we look through a telescope here, we say, oh, that's how it looks. So from the side, it probably looks like this. The reality is it doesn't. The moon is a very three-dimensional object.
Hasselblad cameras were the ones that were used by NASA to photograph everything on the moon. And the reason Hasselblad was used is because they had registration crosshairs. Now, these registration crosshairs are there for specific reasons, okay? They're so that you can take a single photo with a single camera, so you'll be able to get distance from an object to another object because of the registration crosshairs that are built into the Hasselblad camera. These crosshairs are always in front of whatever's being photographed. Okay, this is a perfect shot of a photograph of one of the astronauts on the moon. Now here you see the crosshairs from the Hasselblad camera. Okay? You can clearly see that they are even in the darkness of space, but you can clearly see that the crosshairs are there in exactly the positions they should be. So in a lot of those false horizons, they've eliminated the crosshairs in the sky part. And almost about 90% of the moon shots have what we call a false horizon.
In 1999, William Burroughs wrote a book called This New Ocean. It's a non-fictional account, supposedly non-fictional account, of the space race. If you look at the cover of that book, you'll notice that he has a picture of the Earth's horizon on it with the moon above, and on the cover of this book there are two black running parallel lines that climb up from the Earth, and they pass the moon on either side, paralleling it. It's interesting when you go and look at the ISS and space shuttle imagery of the moon from low Earth orbit. When you begin to enhance those images and begin to attack the black area of the sky that appears to be solid black, and there are different filtering techniques you can use to draw that out, you begin to realize that those lines that are on the cover of this book actually are appearing in these photographs. And they don't appear once or twice. You don't see this effect once or twice. You see this in many dozen photographs. They're just of the moon. They appear when you enhance the image. And obviously Burroughs knows something that the public's not privy to. He's really just a classic outsider-insider, very much like Andrew Chaikin is. He's a guy who knows what the truth is, but has agreed to perpetuate the lie rather than to reveal what the truth is, for a whole variety of reasons.
Burroughs does a fantastic job of presenting to us exactly the propaganda and the storyline that the powers that be have been selling us as being the truth for decades. And he gives the reader the official historical cover story in brilliant details. He's someone who is most definitely in the know. There are also frames in which some of these lines appear to be behind the moon, where you see the line rising up and being cut off as it hits the lower limb of the moon before re-emerging again on the exact opposite side of that interception point, where it continues on its very straight linear path. And in these cases, you can see that the lines do not transit in front of or across the lunar disk, but rather it's the opposite. The moon appears to be transiting and covering these lines. So what's going on here? Why do all these NASA ISS frames of the moon taken from LEO show these parallel lines, and why does this book cover mimic this same visual? What are we seeing, and what is being represented? One hypothesis I've heard has to do with what are called space elevators, which, as the name implies, are elevator transport systems that can be used to lift things, satellites, cargo, spacecraft, people, from the surface of the Earth, lift those up into space. Now, I realize that to many people this idea of building elevators with lengths of tens of thousands of kilometers that could extend from the Earth's surface up to geostationary orbit or to the moon probably sounds ludicrous, something that, if it is possible at all, must be centuries and centuries beyond what we're capable of doing today. But it really does not seem to be as beyond state-of-the-art as one might think. These are the kind of projects being worked on today and funded today. Back in 1999, NASA sponsored what was called the Space Elevator Workshop, and its purpose was to explore the feasibility of the development of space elevators in the 21st century. And it discusses plans for construction that would take place during the later half of the century. And that's all the unclassified stuff. That is what they're willing to tell us about their capabilities.
Were the Egyptian pharaohs and clergymen of their time aware of subterranean places that had celestial functions? Judging by hieroglyphics that were discovered in tombs of pharaohs, such as Ramses, one can see a collaboration between what the Egyptians described in their time as a stairway to heaven and what we are seeing now with these space elevators emanating from Earth.
The vector, NASA's official logo. If you've ever looked at NASA's official logo, both their official insignia and their official seal, you'll see that the most prominent object in the seal is a red swooshing object. They call that the chevron or the vector. If you ask NASA's Public Affairs Office, this symbology is featured so heavily in their insignia and seal, they'll give you what really amounts to the standard facile cover story for the unilluminated. They'll tell you that is a representation of a hypersonic wing design from the 1950s, which was the time the logo was created. Not exactly the case. Someone might want to ask the Russian Federal Space Agency, Roscosmos, that was formed in 1992, why they chose that same logo. And while you're at it, you can go ask the Chinese, who formed their space agency in 1996, why in the world they're using a hypersonic wing design from the 1950s as their official logo. Then you can ask the Japanese, the South Koreans, Taiwanese, Malaysia, Mexico, Iran, all of these countries, even Bulgaria. They all utilize the vector symbology in their space agency logos for their national space agencies. It gets even deeper. You can go look at the individual manned program patches for NASA. The Mercury program, for example, a blatant use of covert symbology. In every logo dealing with the Mercury program, you'll see what looks like a number 7 in their logo. And again, NASA's official story is that they put this number 7 there so that they could pay homage to the original 7 Mercury astronauts. Kind of forgetting the fact that only 6 Mercury astronauts actually flew into space, because number 7 never did. Deke Slayton had a heart problem, so he didn't get to go up. So there were only 6 Mercury astronauts. Yet there's a 7 in every single logo. That's in the official mission or official program insignia for Mercury, as well as the 6 individual mission patches carry this logo. And it carries on to the Space Shuttle program. If you look at the Apollo logo has a big letter A in it. At least that's what they want you to believe, but it's not. Again, that's just a simple way of explaining away the inclusion of this vector symbology in the logo. If you go to the Space Shuttle program,